spend a few minutes with you this morning thinking about Parshat Re'eh, this morning's Torah portion. And just off the bat, Ben, Rabbi Zaslow, anything jump out at you this year?
Yes. I thought we would begin our Torah talk this morning by talking about the maftir of our Torah readings. This was from Devarim chapter 16, verse 13, if you still have your Chumash with you. And it reminded me of a sermon that Rabbi Schwartz that you gave once upon a time, I think in my first year here. You talked about baseball and compared the...
That could be a million sermons.
You compared the high holidays to a baseball game where you're like, oh, I don't know. You're waiting for the end, and it's important to stay there for the ultimate victory at the end because you need the whole experience of the game. Just like we have Rosh Hashanah, we have Yom Kippur, but then there are these other holidays that are at the end of the high holiday season that are just as important. Going to our maftir, Sukkot is right here in our maftir. And it talks about the joy of Sukkot and that it's really like a holiday for everyone. It says your sons, your daughters, your male and female servants, your migrants, the orphans, the widows. So Sukkot is supposed to be a holiday that is joyous for literally every single person in your life. And there's something so beautiful about that with it coming after Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that reminds us about like the human-to-human connection that each of us have with each other and the obligation to bring joy into other people's lives. I was wondering if either of you have any special thoughts about Sukkot or joy.
Yeah, I mean, Sukkot is my favorite holiday.
Why?
So it always has been my favorite holiday.
Come closer.
I love Sukkot because I love, well, first of all, I love biblical festivals in general, but Sukkot in particular is because it's so joyous, and you know, the Gemara refers to Sukkot as Hechag, just the holiday. It doesn't even call it by its name, because everybody knows what holiday you're talking about, because it was so joyful, because it was so fun, and because there were all these wonderful things happening in the temple during Sukkot.
There was fire throwing,
fire, juggling, and
water,
Simchat Beit HaShoevah, and all of these wonderful sacrifices that are happening at the time. It's really like a beautiful time, and so I really love Sukkot, but I love Sukkot also because it asks us to participate in ritual life, but in a relationship with God, using like all of our senses and all of our bodies. Like you're all in on Sukkot, like you're all in, and that's what I love about Sukkot in general. But it's a great holiday. But I think about like this maftir and this parsha in general about incorporating sort of the idea of sacred time and separating sacred time from what I call like mundane time. And you know, really looking forward towards the holidays, the parsha as a whole sort of has me thinking about making that sacred time, separating that, and thinking about, you know, the kind of person I want to be, because we're talking about bracha and kala, blessings and curses, and all of these things.
That was how Re'eh opened.
How it sort of starts, and I think ending on this very positive, joyful note is sort of teaching us how we can think about ourselves, what kind of blessings we want in our lives, the blessings that we, by the way, have an obligation to seek out every day. Right? We shouldn't take for granted. We should seek out blessings where they are, and to end on a very joyful note, you know, at the end of the holiday season.
Remind me to tell you later something that the Sfat Emet
No,
says.
I don't want to hear anything about the Sfat Emet.
About that exact idea. Rabbi, something on Sukkot or joy or the holiday season?
Yeah, I mean, I really see Sukkot as a complementary piece and necessary piece of Yom Kippur. In a number of different ways. So, you know, Yom Kippur, we're so sort of introspective. We are inside shul all day, and we are really thinking about the relationship we have with ourselves, maybe family and God. It's very kind of intimate. And Sukkot says you have to also go outside, and you have to also think about your relationship with the rest of the world. I mean, Sukkot
and with
is
nature.
With nature, with the rest of the world. Sukkot is the most universal of the Jewish holidays, like theologically constructed.
Yeah.
I mean, intentionally so.
Everyone needs to rejoice in it.
But the other piece of it is that Sukkot, yes, simcha, right? It's joy. But Sukkot is also about acknowledging the temporal and fragile quality of life. You go out into a sukkah, which is a temporary hut. You watch the lulav and the etrog sort of decay in the course of the week-long festival. You read Kohelet, right? So it's all that sense of, yes, there's joy, and also remember how precious the joy is by holding it up against the fragility of life. So you know what always strikes me about this Sedra? It's the Sedra that has the passage where it starts at the beginning of the passage, and it literally says, you'll get into the land, and there will be no needy among you. In other words, there will be no poor people. No one will need anything. Everyone will have the food that they need. It's right down the list.
If we follow God.
If it says if you, and then it says a few verses later, there will always be needy among you. Always. And that contrast is so striking to me between the idea that you could create a kind of place where no one will have need, and then on the other hand, you'll never do it. Well,
I think it's not because it will never do it, but I think it's really instructing us to keep a mindset of charity, that we should always be, even though we might not live in this world, we should always have that mindset to be giving to those who are.
Yes, so I think that's part of it. Rabbi Zaslow, you're going to...
That the Torah wants us to take matters into our own hands, to make sure, like, if I think to myself, like, oh, I do the mitzvot, so God will take care of the needy, God will, handle all the charity, then the Torah wants to remind us that even if we're following the mitzvot, that it still is upon us to address the needs of our fellow humans in our lives. And that also we shouldn't think to ourselves, and the Talmud is very big on this, we shouldn't think to ourselves that someone else deserves to be needy in some way, but that we should do the act of tikkun, do the act of healing, and respond to other people's needs.
So thank you. And two other things are just repeated over and over again in the Parsha. One is this idea of consolidating worship. Bamakom asher yivchar, right? In the place that God will choose, never says Jerusalem. Why? Because the author of the text is sitting in Jerusalem writing the text, but the text is supposed to reflect the time before the Israelites have ever settled in Jerusalem. So the author can't say Jerusalem, so he sort of euphemistically says the place that God will choose.
We disagree on this tremendously.
So it says the place that God will choose, but it's this very intensive, purposeful way of consolidating worship. This has to happen in a particular place, in a particular way. And then the other thing, recurrent theme in the Sedra, is this concern about idol worship, which comes up over and over and over again.
So we had this difficult section, a personally difficult section in this parsha, that if there's a town that does idol worship, that there's this obligation to destroy the entire town, which I believe that the Talmud says this never actually happened, so there's no such thing as
Talmud says a lot of things.
The Talmud does say a lot of things. But I think it's theologically difficult because it's asking us to take on a sort of godly vengeance in the name of God. And for me, that feels so outside of how we do Judaism.
So what do you do with that passage?
Let me check the commentary.
So for me, what I do with the passage is that look, what happened in biblical times, right? As time has evolved and as Judaism has evolved, the excoriation against idol worship is still valid to me today. The types of idols are different, right? The types of idolatry that we have today are different, right? Not necessarily mamish and idol, like actually, those do also still exist, but all sorts of things in our world today could be considered idol worship, things that people worship, things that people, use. And I think, we can still use these passages as a way to sort of help us to keep those things out of our lives and do what the parasha is suggesting, to consolidate this worship and really walk with God and God's ways. And by keeping those other things out of our lives, it makes it a little easier.
So it's like a
I think,
caution sign.
Yeah, I think so too. And like what happened in biblical times happened in biblical times. I don't think today God is.
So one possibility is the way that the rabbis choose to reread or reinterpret this scripture is that instead of it being about wiping out an entire town, that it's about us, and this is really like a rabbinic, like, woo! It's about us developing compassion in our own lives.
Sure.
So where it says, Natan lacha rachamim, that it is about saying to us, you need to have compassion. You need to have compassion for other people, even, and this is what the Sfadam had said, even when they sin, or even when they choose bad choices, that you need to judge others favorably, and that ultimately God has compassion for us, God cares about us, so we should love and have compassion for others. So the rabbinic interpretation kind of ignores the simple meaning destroy a town completely.
But what's interesting about that is that that is an illustration of the fact that the Talmudic and Midrashic rabbis were just as disturbed by those verses as you
Sure,
are.
Yeah, 100%.
You know, that they said, that doesn't jive with the Judaism I understand, so we're going to reinterpret that text to think about it in a different way and to move it down into kind of a spiritual, individual level. Yeah. Anything we see in here that's kind of pointing us towards the Yamim Noraim, the high holy days?
The whole Sedra, I think, is pointing us to
In what way?
Well, it's sort of like I was saying earlier about how the parasha opens with this idea of blessings and curses. And that, when we get into the land, we're going to go to the mountains, and there's going to be on the one mountain the blessings, on the other hand the curses. The people will be in a valley, and they'll all this elaborate ritual that is happening. I think it's sort of forcing us to think about, because like you said so inappropriately earlier, that the high holidays were like a month away. That time is rapidly approaching, right? The Yamim Noraim are almost here. Elul, right?
Elul
it's like on Tuesday, right? So this is the time. This is the time, right? This is the time when we should be thinking about those blessings and those curses, and those ideas about what kind of person we want to be, and what kind of world do we want to participate in? What kind of world do we want to be in, right? And how are we going to do that? I don't love the hijacking of Tikkun Olam for social justice purposes. It bothers me tremendously. Tikkun Olam, this idea of repairing the world, is a Kabbalistic concept that I actually identify with very strongly.
But it's about the shattered vessels.
Yeah, shattered vessels, right? And we need to do what we can to sort of put those vessels back together by doing mitzvot, right?
Which sometimes relate to compassion and helping other people, don't they? They do. Ahavta l'recha kamocha.
But yes, but I think that that to your point this is the time to think about that. Right.
This is the time to think about it. That our parsha is setting us up for a positive Elul, for us to be introspective, to bring more mitzvot into the world, to heal the world.
It ends with the calendar.
And that's why it ends with the calendar. It ends with sacred time. Let's choose to do a life of mitzvot.
And how do we remind ourselves of that in an actual way every morning? We start sounding the shofar this week at morning services. So we'll start sounding the shofar.
We'll wake up.
Each and every day, it's helping us get ready. We'll wake up, and it's supposed to be a call to arms, so to speak. Not in the sense of physical arms, but in the sense of spiritual arms, and preparing ourselves for the Yontif season.
Amen.
So, as always, we appreciate you taking some time to indulge us in our Torah Talk, and we're going to turn to the Musaf service.